Have you ever ruined a perfectly good life just to feel the warmth of a stranger's breath against your neck? The neon sign of the bar next door bleeds a greasy, pulsing red through the taxicab window, blurring the rain-slicked asphalt of J Street into a smear of cheap watercolor. My fingers are trembling so hard I can barely grip the cold glass of my phone, the screen casting a pale, clinical glow over my knuckles where a diamond ring used to sit just 2 days ago. It is 2:30 in the morning in Brooklyn, that precise hour when the city stops being romantic and starts feeling like a cold, empty stage. I hit dial before my remaining liquid courage evaporates, listening to the hollow, rhythmic rings that sound like a heart monitor flatlining. When she answers, her voice is thick with sleep, a heavy, quiet warmth that instantly pulls me back to a cramped, drafty dorm room in Boston where the radiators rattled like old bones. "Rebecca," I whisper, "please don't hang up. I know it's late, and I am drunk enough to make this the worst idea I've ever had." She doesn't say anything at first, just the soft, rhythmic sound of her breathing, a sound I used to map with my fingertips in the dark when we were 20 and believed the world could be folded to fit our desires. "I ran tonight, Rebecca. I ran from a perfectly nice man named Mark who wanted to buy me a townhouse, and then I ran from a couple in a high-rise who looked at me like I was a shiny new toy they could play with until the battery ran out. I am standing on the sidewalk in a vintage dress that is 3 inches too short for this wind, smelling like cheap gin and some stupid, generic guy's cologne, and all I can think about is how soft your lips were." It is a pathetic, desperate confession, the kind of midnight autopsy you perform on your own soul when you realize you have traded safety for a handful of smoke. I hear a rustle of sheets on the other end, the quiet murmur of her husband shifting in his sleep, a man who probably knows exactly how many teaspoons of sugar she takes in her tea. "Emily," she says, her voice dropping to a sharp, hushed warning that freezes the blood in my veins, "you need to stop calling me." For her, those college nights were just a phase, a little bit of company before stepping into a prefabricated life with a white picket fence, but for me, they were the only time I ever felt my own pulse. The line goes dead with a soft click, leaving me alone with the static hum of the city, staring at a flashing yellow light on the corner of Horatio while the rain begins to seep through the thin soles of my shoes. The rain on my face in the dark Brooklyn street dissolves, replaced by the suffocating scent of white lilies and expensive French perfume. Suddenly, I am not standing on a wet sidewalk. I am standing in the dressing room of the church in Connecticut, just 48 hours ago, staring at a $3,000 silk gown that looks like a beautiful shroud. Mark is standing outside the door, his voice a steady, grounding anchor as he talks about the catering deposit and the flights to Maui. He is a good man, a strong man who knows how to fix things, how to make reservations, and how to hold me when the world gets too loud. For 3 years, his love was a warm, heavy blanket, but in that dressing room, it felt like being buried alive under 90 tons of soft wool. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not with the sweet anticipation of a bride, but with the raw, animal panic of someone realizing they have spent their whole life playing a part in the movie of someone else. When I opened the door, still wearing my street clothes instead of the lace veil, the confusion on his face was a physical blow. I remember the exact weight of the diamond ring as I slipped it off my finger, placing it on the vanity table where it clicked against a crystal vase of roses, a sound that felt as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. "Mark," I had said, my voice barely a whisper, but echoing off the high ceilings, "we cannot do this. I cannot marry you." He laughed at first, a nervous, defensive sound, waiting for the punchline, waiting for me to tell him it was just pre-wedding jitters. But when he saw the tears spilling down my cheeks, his smile withered. "Why, Emily," he had asked, his big, calloused hands reaching out to steady me, those hands that always made me feel so protected but now felt like gilded bars. I looked at those veins on the back of his hands, hands that had built our dining table, and I felt a devastating wave of guilt. I had to tell him the truth, a truth I had buried so deep under layers of societal expectations and polite smiles that it had curdled into a quiet poison. "I want to be with women, Mark," I told him, the words tasting like copper and ash on my tongue. "I have tried to force myself to feel what I am supposed to feel, but I feel dead inside, and I cannot pretend anymore just to keep us safe. The silence that followed was suffocating, the air thick with the smell of guttering candles and dying flowers. He stared at me as if I had suddenly spoken in a foreign language, his eyes searching my face for some sign of madness, some crack in the glass. "We are not getting married because you want to be with women," he repeated, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth I had relied on for years. "Yes," I whispered, and in that agonizing moment of destruction, beneath the crushing weight of his heartbreak, I felt the very first spark of my own real life. It was a terrifying, electric current that proved I was still breathing, even as the perfect world we had built together shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces around our feet. The morning sun cuts through the dusty glass window of the little vintage dress shop on Horatio Street, casting long, golden geometric patterns across the racks of silk and lace. I stand there adjusting the hem of a dark green 1950s dress on a mannequin, but my eyes keep drifting across the narrow, rain-washed asphalt to the neon sign of the Coffee Cat. Every single day for the past 3 weeks, I have crossed that street at exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, carrying a hollow ache in my chest and a desperate need for an excuse to breathe. When I push open the heavy glass door of the cafe, the rich, bitter scent of roasted espresso and steamed milk wraps around me like a shield against the cold New York breeze. She is standing behind the counter, her dark hair pinned up loosely with a cheap plastic clip, wiping down the shiny espresso machine with a clean white rag. She looks up and her eyes immediately find mine, a slow, effortless smile spreading across her lips that makes my heart do a dangerous, erratic flip. "What can I get you?" she asks, her voice a soft, musical hum that cuts through the hiss of the milk steamer and the low chatter of the morning commuters. "A small black coffee, please," I say, my fingers nervously tracing the edge of my leather purse, trying to ignore the sudden, electric warmth rising in my cheeks. "That will be $2, she replies, her fingers tapping the vintage cash register with an easy, practiced rhythm. As she hands me the paper cup, our fingers brush for a fraction of a second, a fleeting touch that feels like a low-voltage current passing straight through my skin. "I like your scarf," I murmur, staring at the soft, hand-woven red wool wrapped around her neck, desperately trying to prolong the moment. "Oh, thanks," she says, touching the fringe with a soft laugh. "I borrowed it from a girlfriend who never wears it, so I guess it is mine now." The word girlfriend hangs in the air between us, heavy and loaded with a sudden, silent question that neither of us is brave enough to ask out loud. "I am Emily," I say, offering my hand in a sudden burst of awkward courage. She tilts her head, her brown eyes sparkling with a playful, teasing light as she studies my face. "You know, you do not look like an Emily to me," she says, leaning her elbows on the counter. "I totally thought your name was Ally. You just look like an ally to the girls and me who work here." I laugh, a genuine, bubbling sound that I have not heard from my own throat since I walked away from Connecticut. "Well, Ally works right across the street at the dress shop," I tell her, pointing through the window at the colorful display of vintage fabrics. "Oh, I knew it," she says, clapping her hands together softly. "You have the absolute cutest windows in the neighborhood. I always stop to look at your displays." Knowing she looks for me through the glass, just as I look for her, makes the tiny cafe feel incredibly small, as if the rest of the world has faded into a quiet, black and white blur, leaving only the two of us under the warm yellow lights. I take a slow sip of the scalding black coffee, which is terrible and bitter, but I would gladly drink 100 cups of it just to stand here in the warmth of her gaze. "Do you have a name?" I ask, my voice dropping an octave as the bell above the door chimes with another customer's arrival. "Chloe," she whispers, her eyes locking onto mine with a sudden, intense sincerity that tells me she knows exactly why I am here. The heavy silence of Chloe's cafe fades into the low, electric hum of a 72nd-floor penthouse apartment overlooking the glittering grid of Manhattan. I am sitting on an ultra-modern Italian leather sofa that is too white to be comfortable, holding a crystal glass of 18-year-old single malt scotch that I do not really want to drink. Across from me sit Derek and Vanessa, the married couple from the online classifieds who promised a safe space to explore what I had spent my whole life denying. Vanessa is stunning, wearing a silk emerald green wrap dress that highlights her high cheekbones and soft, dark eyes, while Derek sits beside her, a broad-shouldered man in a tailored charcoal sweater who radiates the familiar, quiet authority of someone who is used to making all the decisions. They look perfect, like a photograph in a luxury catalog, and they look at me with a hunger that is carefully disguised as polite interest. Vanessa reaches out, her hand resting on my knee, her fingers warm and surprisingly slender, a touch that makes my throat tighten with a mixture of thrill and intense anxiety. This is what you wanted, I tell myself. This is the womanly touch you walked away from Mark for, yet my skin prickles with a strange, defensive coldness. Derek leans forward, swirling his drink, his voice smooth as he explains their rules, telling me that they are sincere about who they are and what they want, but that his presence is always part of the contract. He says that even if he is not physically involved in every moment, he is always in the relationship, knowing every detail, a silent partner in the shadow of Vanessa's embrace. As he talks about his theories on how men and women imagine intimacy differently, I feel a slow, suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. Women, Derek says with a soft, knowing smile, imagine the before, the during, and the after, especially the after, where you lie staring at the ceiling next to a stranger while all their flaws howl at you from across the sheets. The words hang in the air, cold and clinical, stripping away the romantic haze of my desperate quest for identity. I look at Vanessa, hoping to find a spark of genuine connection, but her smile is static, a polished mask of welcoming hospitality that belongs to their shared domestic kingdom, not to me. I realize with a sudden, devastating clarity that I am not a person to them. I am a novelty, a beautifully wrapped gift they have purchased to decorate their marriage for a season before the battery runs out. The excitement that brought me to this high-rise dissolves into a hollow, empty ache, leaving me feeling more isolated on this pristine leather sofa than I ever did on the wet sidewalks of Brooklyn. I excuse myself to go to the bathroom, staring at my pale reflection in the marble mirror, wondering how I managed to escape one gilded cage only to immediately walk into another. The cold marble of the bathroom sink does not compare to the freezing dread that pulls in my stomach when Vanessa's name flashes on my phone screen 3 days later. I am sitting in my tiny, rented bedroom, surrounded by unpacked cardboard boxes that smell of damp cardboard and old dust. Her voice on the line is completely stripped of the smoky, silk warmth from the penthouse sofa. Now, she sounds like an insurance adjuster reading a denial of coverage. "Emily," she says, her tone flat and distant, "you need to go get tested." The words hang in the air, cold and heavy, suffocating the quiet morning. "What do you mean?" I whisper, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turn white. She explains, with a terrifyingly clinical detachment, that there was an exposure, that someone from their past circle tested positive, and that we all need to be sure. "Are you contagious?" I ask, my heart hammering a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs as the walls of the room seem to close in on me. "I do not know, probably," Vanessa replies, her voice utterly devoid of comfort. "We are getting tested this week, and you should do the same." A wave of raw panic washes over me as I realize the brutal reality of my new, unstructured life. I do not have health insurance anymore. My coverage was tied to the wedding plans and the shared policy with Mark that I threw away on a Connecticut vanity table. To Vanessa and Derek, this is a minor transactional inconvenience, a glitch in their carefully curated lifestyle, but to me, it is a looming financial and emotional catastrophe. When I tell her about my lack of insurance, she does not offer help or comfort. She simply tells me that they cannot see me or touch me until I have a clean bill of health. "All you have to do is go to a clinic, pay the out-of-pocket fee, and get a prescription," she says, as if she is telling me to pick up dry cleaning. But for me, it means spending hundreds of dollars I do not have, sitting in a sterile, fluorescent-lit waiting room, feeling dirty and discarded. The illusion of their sophisticated, liberating world shatters completely, leaving behind only the freezing realization that I am entirely on my own. They did not want to explore the beautiful, messy depths of my soul. They just wanted a safe, clean plaything, and the moment a shadow of real-world risk entered the frame, They pulled up the drawbridge of their castle and left me shivering in the dark. I hang up the phone and stare at my hands, the hands that used to hold Mark's steady fingers, and for the first time, the terrifying weight of my absolute freedom feels less like flight and more like a never-ending fall. After hanging up the phone with Vanessa, the suffocating silence of my temporary room is too loud to bear, so I run into the cold city night, ending up at a crowded, noisy bar where the amber lights wash over anonymous faces. I spend the night with a total stranger whose name I do not even ask, a man with some stupid, generic American name, just to feel a familiar touch that does not require a complex map of my own soul. It is an ill-advised choice, a desperate attempt to find land in the middle of a storm, but men are so incredibly easy. You walk up to them, you ask them a simple question, and surprise, they do exactly what you want them to do without asking for your heart in return. How am I supposed to easily give up the comfort of a bigger, stronger man lifting me up, moving me around, and making all the decisions for me so I do not have to think for even 5 minutes? I love the way men look when they cannot figure things out, like when they are staring at a green pool table in a smoky tavern with that intense, quiet focus that is so deeply attractive. I love the weight of their big, strong hands, hands with those prominent veins and tiny scars from physical labor, hands that should honestly scare me in the dark but somehow never do. Men are a known territory, a comfortable harbor where I can easily play the part of the beautiful girl, even when I feel completely dead inside. But women terrify me to my very core. They trip me up, twisting my thoughts into complicated knots until I do not know which way is north anymore. It feels like it should be the exact opposite because women are so soft and we share the same delicate parts, but that very softness makes them incredibly dangerous to my carefully constructed peace. A woman looks at you and she sees right through the thick armor you spent years building. She knows exactly where the cracks are because she has those same fragile places inside herself. With a man, I can play a familiar role, satisfy his simple desires, and walk away in total control, getting into a yellow taxicab with no strings attached and no regrets. But with a woman like Chloe, or even the painful memory of Rebecca, every single glance is a quiet interrogation, a soft demand for an honesty that I am not sure I possess. I sit on my friend Penelope's worn-out sofa, drinking cheap red wine out of a chipped coffee mug, wondering how I can want something so badly and yet be so utterly paralyzed by the fear of actually holding it. It is the saddest picture of my own mind, like looking at an autopsy of a girl who is slowly dying of her own painful contradictions. The negative test result from the clinic feels like a golden ticket back into the warm, scented world of the penthouse, but when I arrive at their heavy oak door at 2 o'clock in the morning, the reception is colder than the rain outside. Vanessa opens the door only a few inches, wearing a silk robe that is not the green one she wore when she first invited me in, her eyes wide with a mixture of annoyance and exhaustion. I hold up the paper from the clinic, my voice high and breathless, as I tell her that I am completely clear, expecting her to open her arms and invite me back to the safety of their white leather sofa. But there is no celebration, no sigh of relief. Instead, she just stands there, her face a mask of polite indifference as she tells me that it is late and that I should not have come without calling first. Through the narrow crack in the door, I hear a soft, unfamiliar laugh from the living room, a high-pitched, melodic sound that does not belong to Vanessa, followed by the low, murmuring rumble of Derek's voice. In that silent hallway, the truth hits me like a physical blow to the chest as I realize they did not wait for my blood work. They simply turned the page and found someone new to fill the empty space I left behind. "You found someone else already, did you not?" I whisper, the words burning my throat as I look at Vanessa's beautiful, unchanging face. "Emily, nobody could ever replace you," she says, her voice dripping with a patronizing sweetness that makes me want to scream. "But we have to make healthy choices, and we think it is best if you take some time to figure out what you really want." They closed the door with a quiet, decisive click, leaving me alone in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway, holding my useless piece of paper like a child who arrived late to their own birthday party. With nowhere else to go and my heart hollowed out, I dial my mother's number, desperate for any voice that knows my real name, even if that voice has always been a source of quiet judgment. When she answers, the distant rattle of her morning coffee cup in her pristine Texas kitchen carries over the line, instantly making me feel 6 years old again. I swallow the lump in my throat and tell her that the wedding is off, that I am sleeping on Penelope's couch, and that I think I am bisexual, that I want to date women now. There is a long, agonizing pause where the only sound is the rhythmic hum of her refrigerator miles away, a silence that feels heavier than the entire city of New York. "Well, I hope you are putting that expensive college education we bought for you to some kind of good use," she finally says, her voice flat and utterly devoid of surprise or warmth, before smoothly asking what I would like for breakfast when I eventually decide to come home. It is a masterclass in passive-aggressive dismissal, a polite erasure of my entire existence that hurts far worse than any shouted argument, leaving me standing on the street corner realizing that the people who raised me and the people who desired me have both looked right through me as if I were made of glass. The soft, familiar pattern of 3 short knocks on Penelope's apartment door makes my breath catch in my throat. It is a rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2 days after my disastrous phone call with my mother, and I am sitting on the worn-out green sofa surrounded by the cluttered remnants of someone else's life. When I open the door, Mark is standing in the dim hallway, holding a small cardboard box, his broad shoulders damped from the New York drizzle. He looks tired, the dark circles under his blue eyes mirroring the exhaustion in my own soul, but he tries to harden his jaw, trying to play the part of the angry, jilted fiancé. "I brought your checkbook, your soft blue bathrobe, and that stupid feather pen you always use for your writing," he says, his voice flat as he hands me the box, though his fingers linger on the cardboard for a second too long. I look at him, realizing how terribly transparent he is, how his kindness always shines through even when he is trying his best to be cold. "You are really bad at trying to be an asshole, Mark," I whisper, a small, sad smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. He lets out a ragged sigh, his shoulders dropping as the defensive mask slips away, leaving only the raw, aching vulnerability of the man I loved for 3 years. "I know," he mutters, stepping past the threshold into the small entryway, bringing with him the comforting scent of cedarwood and laundry detergent that used to define my entire world. "When are you coming home, Emily?" he asks, his voice cracking slightly as he reaches out, his large, warm hand gently cupping my shoulder, his thumb brushing against my collarbone. The physical proximity is a sudden, dizzying wave of nostalgia, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, the urge to crawl back into the safety of his arms is almost too powerful to resist. I want to close my eyes, to pretend the last month was just a bad dream, and let him carry me back to our quiet townhouse in Connecticut. But as his fingers press warmer against my skin, my body remains completely, devastatingly silent. There is no electric spark, no instinctive leaning into his touch, only a heavy, hollow stillness that confirms the absolute truth of my awakening. I look at his handsome face, at the veins on his strong hands, and I know that forcing myself to love him again would be a slow, quiet suicide. I gently step backward, letting his hand fall through the empty air between us. "I am so sorry, Mark," I say, the tears hot and heavy in my eyes, "but I cannot come back." He looks at his empty hand, then at me, the final, painful realization washing over his face that he is no longer my safe harbor, before he turns and walks down the quiet corridor, leaving me alone with my box of belongings and the terrifying, beautiful certainty of my own path. The echo of the door closing behind Mark still vibrates in my chest as I sit on Penelope's green sofa, staring at the feather pen in my hand. But instead of wrapping myself in the blue bathrobe he brought, I find myself standing in front of the mirror, putting on a dark green vintage dress with silver buttons from the shop on Horatio Street. 30 minutes later, the rain has slowed to a cold, misty drizzle, and I am walking into a tiny, low-lit tavern 3 blocks from the Coffee Cat, where the air smells of old cedar wood and spilled lager. Chloe is already there, sitting at a corner booth under a shaded amber lamp, wearing a simple black turtleneck that makes her eyes look impossibly deep and dark. When she sees me, she does not wave, she just holds my gaze, her lips parting into that slow, quiet smile that makes the noisy bar feel like a silent movie theater. I slide into the booth opposite her, my knees nearly brushing against hers under the small wooden table, a sudden proximity that makes the breath catch in my throat. "I brought you something," she says, sliding a small, warm paper bag across the table, inside of which is a single cinnamon scone, still radiating the oven's heat. "I figured since you always drink that terrible coffee just to talk to me, you deserve something that actually tastes good," she says, her voice a soft, teasing purr that makes my cheeks flush hot in the dim light. I laugh, my fingers tracing the warm paper bag, realizing how completely she is seen through my daily routine. "Is it that obvious?" I ask, looking down at my hands, which suddenly feel too large and awkward. "It is incredibly obvious," she whispers, leaning forward so that the scent of her hair, like sweet vanilla and wet rain, drifts across the small space between us, but I did not mind, in fact. "I looked for you in the dress shop window every single morning at 9 o'clock, waiting for that dark green coat to appear." Hearing her say the words aloud makes a shiver of pure, terrifying excitement run down my spine, a feeling so entirely different from the heavy, comfortable safety I had known with Mark. "Why did you ask me out tonight, Chloe?" I ask, my voice dropping to a quiet, earnest whisper as the bartender slides 2 gin and tonics onto the coaster. She wraps her slender fingers around her glass, her eyes locking onto mine with a sudden, intense sincerity that makes me feel entirely exposed. "Because you interest me, Emily," she says softly, "because you look like someone who is trying very hard to find her way home, and I wanted to see if I could help you find it." We touch glasses, the soft clink of crystal lost in the low rumble of the tavern, and as we take our first sip, I know there is no turning back from this beautiful, frightening road. The rain-soaked Brooklyn street outside Chloe's apartment is quiet, the distant hiss of traffic on Flatbush Avenue sounding like a television tuned to a dead channel. We are sitting on her small, velvet futon that smells of lavender oil and old paperbacks, with only the amber glow of a single street lamp filtering through the sheer lace curtains to illuminate the space between us. Chloe is looking at me, her gaze steady and heavy with a question she has been carrying all night, her fingers tracing the edge of her porcelain teacup. The air in her room is warm and comforting, yet I feel a familiar, tight knot of anxiety twisting in my chest, a quiet alarm reminding me of the shattered pieces of Connecticut I still carry in my pocket. I reach out, my fingertips brushing the soft sleeve of her black turtleneck, wanting nothing more than to dissolve into her softness, to let her presence erase the lingering shadow of Mark's empty hands and the cold dismissal from Derek and Vanessa. Chloe does not pull away, but she gently catches my hand in hers, her palm warm and incredibly soft, stopping my fingers before they can slide any further. "Emily," she whispers, her voice a quiet, serious melody in the dim room, "I want you to stay tonight, and I want to hold you until the sun comes up, but we need to talk about what this actually is." I look down at our joined hands, my throat suddenly dry as the vulnerability of the moment presses against my ribs. "What do you mean?" I ask, my voice barely a breath against the quiet. She sighs softly, her thumb rubbing a gentle circle on the back of my hand, her eyes locking onto mine with an honesty that makes me feel completely naked. "I am not a temporary stop on your journey of self-discovery," she says, her words gentle but sharp enough to slice through my defensive armor, "and I am not here to simply fill the empty spaces left behind by your fiancé or anyone else. You are beautiful, Emily, and I find you incredibly attractive, but you are still bleeding from your old life, and every time you look at me, I can feel you measuring the distance between the safety you lost and the freedom you are terrified of." Her words are a devastating autopsy of my own heart, revealing the ugly, unresolved truth I have been trying so hard to run from. She is right. I am still vibrating with the shock of my own awakening, still haunted by the phantom comfort of Mark's steady strength and the biting sting of being discarded by Vanessa. Chloe leans closer, her forehead gently resting against mine, her breath sweet and warm on my lips, yet there is a clear, unbreakable boundary in her touch. "I will sleep next to you, and I will kiss you, but I will not let myself fall in love with a girl who still has one foot out the door," she murmurs, "because I deserve someone who is fully here, not someone who is just playing pretend to escape her own loneliness. As we lie down together under her heavy patchwork quilt, the warmth of her body next to mine is both a salvation and a quiet, aching reminder that the hardest part of waking up is learning how to stand on your own 2 feet before you try to walk with someone else. The pale blue light of dawn slowly creeps over the brick buildings of Brooklyn, finding me sitting alone at the scratched wooden kitchen table of Penelope while the rest of the city is still asleep. Chloe was still breathing softly under her patchwork quilt when I slipped out of her apartment at 5 in the morning, leaving behind the warm lavender scent of her room and the heavy, unresolved weight of her words. On the table before me lies my old, battered notebook, its black cardboard cover frayed at the corners, containing the messy, handwritten pages of the stories I call subway tales. I slowly turn the pages, the blue ink faded and smeared in places, reading the fragments of lives I have observed on the trains, women staring out of dirt-streaked windows, searching for something they cannot name. Mark used to tell me that my writing was like speaker static, that he had no idea what I was trying to say, but looking at these pages now, I realize I was never writing about strangers. I was performing a slow, meticulous autopsy on my own suffocating soul, dissecting my own desires before I even had the courage to live them. Every paragraph is a quiet scream from a girl who was trying so hard to fit her massive, untamed feelings into the narrow, polite margins of a life she did not want. I look at the old photographs tucked between the pages, Polaroids of college days with Jane McFarland, and the smiling digital pictures of women on dating profiles that Penelope showed me, women who looked so beautifully put together while I felt like a ghost. It is indeed the saddest picture of my own mind, a gallery of beautiful, terrifying possibilities that I have been too cowardly to touch. I have spent the last month running from the warm, safe harbor of my fiancé, only to throw myself into the arms of a married couple who treated me like an ornament, and then demanding that Chloe save me from my own darkness. I wanted Chloe to hold me so tightly that I would not have to feel the terrifying draft of my own empty space, but she was right to push me back. I cannot ask another woman to love me when I am still looking at my own reflection, as if it were a tragic medical specimen on an operating table. The sun finally rises over the East River, casting a bright, unforgiving light on my messy handwriting, and for the first time, the speaker static in my head begins to clear. I grasp my feather pen, the one Mark returned to me in that damp cardboard box, and I begin to write a new line. Not about regrets or phantom lovers, but about a woman who is finally brave enough to sit in the quiet room of her own making and just breathe. The afternoon sun of Manhattan strikes the rusty iron rungs of the fire escape outside our old East Village apartment, the very spot where I used to force Mark to sit in the freezing winter wind just to read the messy first drafts of my subway tales. I stand on the cracked concrete sidewalk of 2nd Avenue, holding the heavy brass key to the front door in the palm of my hand, feeling its cold metal bite into my skin one last time. Mark is waiting for me on the steps, wearing his favorite faded denim jacket, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets as he watches me approach with a quiet, patient expression that no longer makes my chest tighten with guilt. There is no anger left in his eyes, only the soft, fading embers of a story that we both now know has reached its final sentence. I slide the key into his palm, our skin brushing with a gentle, dry warmth that carries none of the terrifying electricity of the touch of Chloe, but instead feels like a quiet thank you for 3 years of honest, steady shelter. I also hand him the paper receipt for the wedding venue deposit, a single sheet of white paper that represents the $1,000 we will never get back, but which feels like a remarkably cheap price to pay for my freedom. He looks at the key, then up at the fire escape where we used to dream about a future that was never truly mine, a small, sad smile softening the corners of his mouth. "Do you remember when we thought this drafty little place was a castle?" he asks, his voice a low, steady rumble that blends with the city bus passing by. "I do," I say, my voice clear and steady in the crisp afternoon air, "and I will always love that version of us, Mark, but she was a girl who was trying to write a story with missing words, and I had to go find them." He nods slowly, his chest rising and falling with a long, slow breath as he slips the key into his pocket, officially releasing the lease of our shared past. He reaches out to give my shoulder a brief, reassuring squeeze, those big, strong hands with the familiar veins and working scars that used to represent my entire world, but now they are just the hands of a dear friend who is letting me go. "Take care of yourself, Emily," he says softly, his blue eyes holding mine with a genuine sincerity that is his greatest gift, and keep writing those stories, even if they are like speaker static to the rest of the world. I watch him turn and walk down the crowded avenue, his broad shoulders disappearing into the sea of moving faces, and for the very first time since I walked away from Connecticut, I do not feel like I am falling. I stand under the iron shadow of the fire escape, taking a deep, clean breath of the dusty New York air, knowing that the autopsy of my past is finally complete and the blank page of my future is waiting to be filled. The rhythmic, mechanical screech of the metal wheels against the iron tracks reverberates through the concrete caverns of the subway station, a heavy, familiar vibration that rises through the soles of my flat leather shoes. I stand on the crowded platform of the J Street metro station, holding my black cardboard notebook close to my chest like a shield, watching the yellow headlights of the incoming train slice through the subterranean gloom. It is 5 o'clock in the evening, the peak of the rush hour, and the air is thick with the scent of wet umbrellas, hot electricity, and the damp wool of coats worn by hundreds of commuters hurrying to their prefabricated lives. The silver doors of the train slide open with a loud, pneumatic hiss, releasing a warm wave of air that carries the faint, nostalgic scent of sweet vanilla and lavender. I step onto the crowded car, my eyes scanning the sea of anonymous faces, when suddenly my breath catches in my throat. Standing near the center pole, wearing her soft red wool scarf and a simple dark coat, is Chloe. She is holding a paperback book, her fingers tracing the edge of the page with the same quiet grace I watched behind the coffee counter on Horatio Street. As the train jerks forward, navigating the curved tracks toward Manhattan, she looks up, and her brown eyes immediately find mine through the space between the standing passengers. There is no sudden panic in her face, no quick pretense of looking away. Instead, she just holds my gaze, her lips parting into a slow, genuine smile that makes the roar of the subway fade into a soft, quiet hum. I make my way through the crowd, my heart hammering a steady, calm rhythm against my ribs that is entirely different from the frantic panic of the past month. "Hi," I say, my voice clear and grounding as I stand beside her, our shoulders brushing gently with the movement of the train. "Hi, Emily," she whispers, her eyes shining with a warm, quiet sincerity as she closes her book and slips it into her purse. We do not try to play pretend, and we do not rush to fill the quiet air with defensive explanations or desperate promises. For the first time, I do not feel the urge to run, and I do not need her to hold me so tightly that I disappear. I look at her beautiful face, noting the tiny mole behind her left ear and the soft curves of her waist, and I feel a profound, peaceful stillness settle deep into my bones. "Are you still tired of buying terrible coffee?" she asks, her voice dripping with a playful, teasing light that makes me laugh. "I am," I reply, looking straight into her brown eyes without a single shadow of doubt or fear. "Then let us get a real drink," she says softly, her hand gently slipping into mine, her warm, slender fingers weaving through my own with a quiet certainty that tells me we are both finally ready. We step off the train together at the next stop, walking hand in hand into the crisp New York evening, ready to write a brand new story on a clean, blank page.